beautiful paper models or whatever. I suppose, I mean, there's no single way of working. What I would say is that we work a lot in section to start. Yvonne says that the section is about emotion and the plan is rational, and I don't agree with that, but there you are. It's interesting. So there's that toing and froing between, because in section you're dealing with volumetric relationships, and then models come into play because you can't think in a spiral sometimes. You know, your head goes into a twist. You're trying to think, well, how did one thing meet another? So you need to make a paper model. You need to make something. So I think it is very much about setting up spatial relationships. And in the beginning, we found that making architecture was really difficult because we weren't skillful, and we worked a lot in plan and in a very rational way. And then we found that it was really important to just let imagination run a bit freer and say, well, what is it actually like? And instead of saying, well, there's something that's here and something else is there. Is it like a contemporary monastery? Is it like a cliff? And I mean, some of these things are crazy, a building being like a cliff. Or making, one of the things we love actually is not taking the so-called typology so seriously, like a university has to be like this. Because what we loved about Lima is that a university was based on a football stadium. And it makes a great university, you know, so that you can take a structure or and it was because it was vertical and it was banana shaped, the site was. And we had to go up, and it's seismic, so there needed to be a lot of fire stairs and all that stuff. So it seemed that a football stadium, we actually started sitting down converting football stadiums into sections into university and see what would it be like. We don't have a fixed way of working, and it's always painful, and we're always lost, and we get cranky like you do, and we try to find something then that starts to settle what we think the potential is. What is the, like finding that little space under Lincoln's Inn Chapel was a way in for us to doing that project, because it gave us a structural idea and it gave us an idea about the ground floor, that you could have this kind of atlas type structure holding up this building, and then there's this crack where the city runs through, and then you have this big box in the basement, and that you can feel this weight of, and it was very horizontal, whereas very often we start thinking about entrance spaces as being about volume and vertical, but this was heavy and horizontal with one big hole really in it. And it's pragmatic, but I do think it's in working with students, it's how to let your imagination run, and at the same time hold it with the rigor of the need of the project. So when you say they're complicated, it's because we're dealing with volumes and the interaction of volumes. And we couldn't believe the sections through Toulouse when we were drawing them, but because we didn't design them by section, we designed them as models. And then when you take a slice through it, it looks really complicated. But you know, so you need a number of different techniques, I think.
I think Dylan, when you can, like, your question, how do you start? You start in a muddle, but there's also the thing of measure. I think that, you know, don't underestimate every time you walk. Okay, you have to be, you know, in 5K now, but really know what 5K is and what 1K is and what length is something. And the measure of, I think that there's, you know, into the mixing. If we were a school of cookery or something, you know, you'd be setting out all your ingredients, you know, out in a, you know, how do you make a stew, or how do you make a casserole, or how do you make a really beautiful something or other. But you put out there are certain ingredients, and sometimes the ingredients work really well, better than others. And I think that one of the things that we find about that each project is actually an invention. You know, you might take a collage of all other things, but the location and the place and the budget and the society and all those things are all those layers. There isn't a linear kind of thing. Like, it's interesting, both the question comes from a Marley, and I saw Bob Marley here in Dublin, and you're Dylan, like you're both names related to music when I see them written down. And music, when you think of music and invention, Bob Marley was incredible and Dylan is incredible, that they invent with words, and that what you are doing, training as an architect, is learning how to put all those words in different relationships, so that the section, like when we were doing, which Shelley was returning to say Lima, that the angle of the sun and working with environmental engineers and work, that all the layers add onto a building. It's incredible. And the image, somebody beside you there has an image of the houses up in Stoneybatter, which are really just a wall and this series of doors and that enclosure across, those roads in Oxmantown. That brick wall folded across and then another brick wall is this huge spatial enclosure, and they're very simple structures of 2 up and 2 down or whatever, but so that architecture can be very simple as well as being very complex. So I think the thing is that it's invention and scale, and try your best and make mistakes, make mistakes and do terrible projects as a student, and then sometimes hopefully you do a good one and then do another one, and sometimes you don't know what you're doing, but that's the normal kind of progression of invention.
That's great, thanks.
Never be afraid of being naive. We're all naive.
How are you guys doing for time? Actually, we have a few more questions. Are you happy to?
I was wondering what you were going to ask. Yeah, so long as it's not too many. It's coming dangerously close to dinner time.
Right. So I think we have one here from Oisin, and then I don't know if Donal has one there.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't know if Oisin wants to pop on his mic.
Oisin, you're not named after a famous singer.
No, sadly not. Can you hear me there? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My question was just like looking at your projects, like you can easily see, and I think it's kind of feeds into Dylan's question a bit too, that structure is kind of used a lot in it, and like really kind of strong use of structure that you can see it easily, and you can feel it in the architecture of the building. So I just wanted to ask really quickly, like, do you feel like that was something that you had you slowly, gradually built up as being able to use structure in such a way, or was it something that was kind of just innate to the way you sort of thought about architecture generally?
It was very interesting. When we got our first project in Trinity College, which is a very small project, really, but really important project, there was also working in the office, working with structural engineers doing bridge structures. And roughly around the same time was also a project out in University College Dublin, which was the Urban Institute, which had a structural system of very simple cross walls in one direction and the roof in another direction. And one thing was leading to another. And then we moved to Bocconi, where the scale of structure is 25 meters span. And you realize through lots of study, I suppose, and lots of experiment, that when schools of architecture and schools of engineering broke, that it was a real sad time in terms of making of space, because the relationship between space and structure and architecture is in fact an incredibly strong one, that it's not layered. That's why we're interested, say, in the project in Arkansas, let's say, because it hopefully has the structure exposed as the thing it is, and that the space is expressed through that very thing, that it isn't then hidden with layers and layers and layers of other materials, that the relationship between the scale of space and structure is something that's really very beautiful. That you read in Shell's section, she was talking about the forces of gravity, that you're able to read those rather than it being kind of layered by plasterboard and hidden with other layers, so that the very structure of a building is lost.
I think what was interesting by working on motorway bridges is we couldn't believe the size of the column. We couldn't even put our arms around the column. You know, it's just enormous. And that there are these huge things which support these big, you know, lines of structure which span across roads. And it's interesting, Yvonne, I'd never thought of because the Urban Institute was a different thing. It was a tartan grid, and that was really cheap. So we used concrete block walls, no ring beams, and crosshair kind of beams which made roof lights, and that stabilized the block walls. And actually we found ourselves using that exact crosshair kind of approach in doing a huge project in Bacony, where we had the big 25-meter piers going in one direction, and then the offices spanning across. So it was like losing the fear of making big structure and becoming very interested in the liberating capacity of structure, and also knowing that the way you put things together has to have a sense of stability in itself. And we became more and more interested in that because of the spatial consequences, not just because it was about pure structure, but because it really liberated space in a different way to thinking, maybe thinking from space and then thinking about structure.
You tell a great story, Shell. When we won the competition in Bacony, Shell arrived over to one of the meetings with the structural engineer, and they were kind of grumpily looking at these architects arriving in from an island off the coast of Europe. And Shell had this box, and out of the box were taken all these structural studies, which were to make the competition entry, but also think about it. And this kind of shoebox of structural studies melted the heart of these kind of tough structural engineers with a fantastic tradition in Italy. Because if you understand the principles of the thing, and there's a communication through, going back to David's conversation before the lecture today about the making of models, that the models actually show an intention, even if they're very scrawny and very elemental. But structure is, I mean, it's just like even looking at trees now, the structure of trees just before the leaves come on them. I mean, when we're working with our students and we're trying to understand trees, we look at also the foundations, the roots of trees, and what they're, you know, that the structure of a tree should be the fascination of every architect around the place, Oisín. So structure is everywhere, your own body, your bones, you know, it's structure and skin are really, you know, I hope they all stay together as long as possible.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Was Donald, what you were saying, Donald had a, what?
I wasn't sure now if Donald had one. He seems to have vanished there. So I suppose if that's okay with everybody, we might wrap it up here. Thanks very much, Yvonne and Shelley, for coming on and being so generous with your time. It was really inspiring, and I'm sure it's kind of rekindled our love for architecture in these kind of frustrating lockdown times. And thanks very much to everybody who came along. This is our last lecture, and we might look into doing something else, some more competitions with the ASA. So from all of us, have a great week, and bye for now.
Thanks very much. Thank you all.
Everybody.
Thank you
Bye.
so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Is that allowed? Hello.
Still 20 people.
Ooh. Here we are now.
They were lovely.
All the boys. That was the most wonderful thing that's happened to me.
The best thing.
Actually, no, that's not true. That was lovely. Hello.